This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is April 2nd, 2025. I'm going to explain to you why it is that the Jews of Israel are shamelessly and without remorse committing genocide against the Palestinian people. They've been planning to do this for 2,500 years and fabricated all kinds of religious pretexts for destroying, annihilating, exterminating the people of the land of milk and honey so that they could steal their land and live there. People are confused as to how they can so shamelessly and without remorse set babies on fire and burn them to death, blow up hospitals, zip tie people's hands, and then shoot them in the back of the head execution style for fun. How they can steal other people's lands and try to justify it by the bad experiences that the Jewish people supposedly have had throughout history. So I'm going to explain this based upon the history that they've fabricated. I'm not saying that this is their actual history. I'm just trying to explain to you how they think and how they justify this to themselves. So according to their accounts, and this obviously is not the true history, but according to their accounts, they were initially a nomadic people of the Middle East, and they ventured off into the land of Egypt, and they saw that the Egyptians were mighty and beautiful people, and they concluded that the Egyptians were so mighty and so wondrous and beautiful and advanced and had such a vast empire because the gods of Egypt were magnificent gods, powerful gods, ruling gods that ruled over the whole pantheon of all other gods. And so they decided that they were going to steal those gods from the Egyptians so that they themselves could become a mighty, beautiful, and wondrous people. And the chief god of the Egyptians at that time was the god Seth, the god of primordial chaos. And he was the god that was worshipped by Ramses II. And the empire of Ramses II extended from the Nile to the Euphrates, and he conquered the land of Canaan, which is the land of milk and honey that the Jews decided they wanted to steal for themselves. So they fabricated the notion that Seth made a deal with them, that they were supposedly slaves in the land of Egypt, and that Seth agreed to free them from this bondage and give them the land of milk and honey, the land of the indigenous Canaanites that Ramses II had conquered as part of his territory that became the land of Greater Israel, or is slated to become the land of Greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates, the land of the covenant in Genesis. But Seth said that as part of this deal, since I freed you from the Egyptians, you, the Israelites, the Jews, there never were any real Israelites, the Judahites, the Jews, would have to obey Seth and become Seth's slaves. It says that in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 55. And part of their slavery was that they would have to obey the commandments of this god, Seth, to exterminate the people, the indigenous people of the land of milk and honey. And eventually they would have to help Seth to kill off all the rest of humanity, save a remnant of Jews. But if they disobeyed Seth, and if they did not follow these commandments of Seth, then Seth would do to them what he had always pledged to do to the non-Jews, to utterly exterminate the Jews. So the Jews were obliged to follow their new slave master, Seth, because it was Seth who freed them from Pharaoh and brought them into the promised land of milk and honey. But Seth had all kinds of ridiculous laws and commandments, the chief of them being that they had to utterly exterminate the Canaanites and the 7 nations of the land of milk and honey, and ultimately all the people of the land of Ramses II Empire from the Nile to the Euphrates, and ultimately all of non-Jewish humanity, leaving only a small remnant of Jews behind to live in this promised land of milk and honey and rule the entire world, which would now be devoid of any other form of human life than Jewish life. So the Jews followed Seth into the land of milk and honey, and they set about to commit genocide against these peoples, but they didn't actually kill all of them off. Instead, they eventually started to intermarry with them and to believe in their gods Baal and Asherah, who has come to be called Shekinah. And that really angered Seth. And Solomon had built a house for Seth, a temple, the Temple of Solomon. And he built it with the help of angels and demons. And Solomon took on foreign wives and started to worship strange gods, foreign gods, Moloch and Baal. And Moloch is just another form of Seth. It's the god Saturn. And that angered the hell out of Seth, that they should be worshiping Asherah and Baal instead of Seth. And they broke that contract. They ceased to be the slaves of Seth because they hated Seth. They knew that Seth was a monster god, a cacodemon, as the Greeks called it. And they only pretended to worship Seth, to flatter Seth, and so that Seth would help them kill off all their enemies, and so that Seth wouldn't kill them off. But when they started worshiping these foreign gods and marrying foreign women, Solomon took on foreign wives, and they started to sacrifice their firstborn children in the temple, Seth destroyed his house, and he sent the Jews into exile among the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. So the Jews were exiled, just like Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden. They were kicked out of their paradise, their promised land of milk and honey, and they were forced to live with the Babylonians. And that's the way that this contract with Seth works. The Jews are obliged to conquer the land of Canaan, the land of Palestine, and to kill everyone that lives there. And ultimately to kill all the rest of humanity. And if they do that, then their god Seth will keep up his end of the contract and will give them all the beauty and might of the Gentiles, and as well as the souls of the Gentiles. They will not only capture the gods of the Gentiles, whom they view as superior to themselves, they will also capture the souls of the Gentiles, take all their land, take all their gold and silver, and bring it to Seth's house in Jerusalem. And he'll help them to do that. But they got to keep up their end of the bargain. Just as Adam and Eve had to keep up their end of the bargain and not consume the fruit, the forbidden fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and not consume the fruit of the tree of life and become gods themselves. Seth is a wrathful, angry, jealous God, and he doesn't want there to be any other gods, least of all the human beings that he has supposedly created out of clay to become gods themselves, because he knows they will ultimately kill Seth, because Seth's a bastard and they hate Seth. So the Jews didn't keep up their end of the bargain, and like Adam and Eve, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. They were expelled from the paradise of the promised land of milk and honey and sent into Babylon. But eventually their God was merciful and restored them to the promised land of milk and honey. And they built Seth another house, the so-called Second Temple. And lo and behold, they started to become proud and arrogant, and they believed that they themselves had accomplished all that. And most importantly, they hated Seth, because Seth was a bastard and commanded them to do all kinds of horrible and stupid things, and they didn't want to do it. So they started intermarrying with the indigenous people. They started to assimilate, and they started to forget about Seth, and they didn't study his written Torah. So, like Adam and Eve, who disobeyed, they got kicked out. They got exiled into the Roman Empire. And the house of Seth was destroyed. Those are the two things that are the punishment: the exile and the destruction of God's house. So they had to follow this same model all over again. They had to usurp the gods of the Gentiles, the gods of the Romans, the gods of the Europeans, and take on their philosophy and their knowledge and their technology that would make men immortal and once again androgynous, like the gods. And they had to destroy, as they are commanded to do, all the Gentile peoples, and especially the people of the land of Canaan, the people of the land of Palestine, the Palestinians. So, supposedly, though it was done by their own hand, they were persecuted throughout this 2,000-year exile from Canaan, from Palestine. And ultimately they endured the Holocaust. And that supposedly was horrible enough to satisfy Seth's sense of justice. And so he allowed them to return to Canaan, to the promised land. The exile supposedly began to end. But they were once again commanded to kill off all the Palestinians. And the deal is that they have to build a house for Seth. They have to build the third temple in Jerusalem on the site of El-Aqsa Mosque at the Dome of the Rock. They have to kill off and exterminate and chase out all the Palestinians, steal all of their land, conquer all of the land of the kingdom, the empire of Pharaoh Ramses II. And ultimately they have to kill off everyone who is not Jewish, and 2/3 of the Jewish people. So that's the stage we're at right now. They are trying to reconstruct the Garden of Eden, to end their exile from paradise, and to build the house of Seth. And lo and behold, most Jews are now atheists. They don't worship Seth. So they are slated to endure horrible things once again. They're slated to endure another exile. And we are entering into this highly dangerous period where they are preparing to build the temple, to study the Torah, to fulfill the mitzvot of exterminating the Palestinians and everyone else, so that they don't get exiled once again, and so that if they build the third temple, it will not be brought down by Seth, and like Adam and Eve, they will not be kicked out of the Garden of Eden, kicked out of the promised land of milk and honey. But their prophecies say that's exactly what's about to happen. And that will be horrible for everyone on the face of the earth. And that is why the Jews so shamelessly and remorselessly and celebratorily are exterminating the Palestinians. It's a precursor to killing us all off, so that we cannot send them into exile, so that we cannot destroy their third temple. But the masses of Jews don't realize that they too are being set up for exactly that to happen, for 2/3 of them to be exterminated as well, and for them to endure all kinds of horrors, so that Seth is satiated and satisfied that justice has been meted out to them for their extensive disobedience throughout all of history. So the Palestinians were called the Amalekites by Benjamin Netanyahu, as I've been predicting would happen for 30 years. The Amalekites are people who has to be completely exterminated. So they believe they are fulfilling their duty with their contract with Seth, that in order to live in the promised land of milk and honey, they have to kill all the indigenous people that live there. And not only that, they have to kill everyone in the kingdom of Pharaoh Ramses II from the Nile to the Euphrates, and everyone who is not Jewish on the face of the earth. Perhaps now you can better understand why the Jews do all this, and they further justify all this based upon the same model. Their initial model was persecution and slavery in Egypt, which supposedly forced them under this contract with Seth to steal the land of Palestine and kill off the Palestinians, then called Canaanites, so that they would be safe from the Egyptians and from everyone else. They reenact this model over and over and over again, and now they're saying that they have the right to steal the land of the Palestinians and exterminate them, not only because of the contract with Seth, but because of the Holocaust. So they have to have a land of their own and kill off everyone else, so that everyone else doesn't kill them off. But they had planned all of this 2,500 years ago, and the initial pretext for killing everyone off was so that Seth would not do to them what Seth had pledged to do to the Gentiles. I want to thank all of my contributors for making this possible. If you're not aware, I have set up a Buy Me a Coffee link and page where you can go and contribute. And if you do, I will retweet your note that you leave me on Buy Me a Coffee. You can utilize a pseudonym or a first name or a social media link, and I will retweet that for you to express my gratitude toward you. I want to thank all my wonderful contributors who made this presentation possible. Please help share this with everyone, And I will see all you good people next time. Goodbye for now.